Hello listeners, and welcome to Yates CCE Gardens, Native Alternatives. I'm Lydia.
And I'm Caroline.
And in each episode, we'll be talking to you about a different invasive plant we have seen in the area and giving you native alternatives to plant instead. Remember, natives are always a better bet for your garden, and we are here to help you find the best one for your space. This week, we've got another beautiful but invasive flower. Hesperis matronalis, or dame's rocket, originated in Eurasia and escaped cultivation in the US in the 1600s. Also called dame's violet, mother of the evening, or sweet rocket, it likes moderate sun with slightly wet to slightly dry moisture, but can tolerate full sun with adequate watering. Its flowers are fragrant clusters of pink, magenta, or white, and it's often mistaken for a native flower and added to wildflower seed mixes. This is an invasive plant, however. It spreads quickly, and each plant can produce up to 20,000 seeds, which are dispersed when the seed pods open. The seed pods can then be spread farther by ground foraging birds. Dame's rocket has a habit of forming dense monocultures, crowding out native plants until they're the only species in an area. This ecological disruption displaces native insects as well. Finally, this herbaceous ornamental is a host to viruses harmful to cruciferous plants like cauliflower, cabbage, and broccoli. So Caroline, what can they plant instead?
So we have a couple alternatives, and I'm just going to say, I know these are pretty plants, and it's hard to mow them down. And I think that's where we see a lot of them, is that people see these beautiful purple flowers and they just go, oh, but they're good for the bees. But dame's rocket is really easily replaced with a couple other plants. It is an almost dead ringer for phlox, which is a much nicer garden alternative. And the two phlox I'm going to talk about today, the first one is garden phlox. And as I said on our last episode, there are a lot of phloxes. You have to make sure to keep them straight. So I'm going to give you the scientific name to start off with. Phlox paniculata. This is that beautiful old-fashioned phlox you see in cottage gardens. It's hardy from zones 4 to 8. Its native range is all over the eastern United States. It grows about 2 to 4 feet tall and spreads about 2 to 3 feet wide. Its bloom time is a nice long bloom time from July to September. Much nicer, much longer than the dame's rocket. The flowers are very similar. They come in lots of shades of pink and purples to whites. Grows beautifully in full sun to part shade, has medium water requirements, and it's relatively easy to take care of. The flowers are extremely showy and fragrant, and I'm going to share with you in a second a couple of my favorite varieties. And it will attract birds, hummingbirds, and butterflies to your garden. In addition, deer dislike eating it. It thrives in clay soil. And, as many of our other natives are, it is tolerant to black walnut. So a couple of varieties to note, and I'm just going to say this. One of the issues with garden phlox is it does get powdery mildew. And powdery mildew is a very common summer disease. We've seen it. It rarely kills a plant, but it can make them look a little ragged. So the varieties I'm going to talk about today are powdery mildew resistant. So one of the classics is David, which has pure white flowers. Beautiful, nice, it stays standing for a long time. It's just a lovely phlox. Another one which I really love is called sherbet, however you want to say it, cocktail, which I think is a great name. And it's the first phlox with yellow in its flowers. It's actually a hybrid between two native phlox varieties. It has yellow-green buds that emerge out of chocolate maroon bracts, which is really showy. And then they open into this green and yellow-edged flower with soft pink and white centers. It is absolutely gorgeous.
That does sound beautiful.
It is gorgeous, and it makes a great cut flower. It's also a dwarf plant, so you're not going to have it kind of flopping over on you. It has nice, strong, short stems. Another one I want to talk about really quickly is Delta Snow. This is one of the most powdery mildew resistant of the phlox varieties that have been tested. Mount Cuba Center did testing on powdery mildew resistance in garden phlox, and this was one of the winners. It has white flowers with a sort of a lavender center to those flowers.
Ooh.
And their one complaint is the flowers were too big.
Which is not a complaint that many people have.
A complaint. They just covered too much of the plant, and the stems kind of V'd out to the side because the blooms were too heavy. But they didn't flop all the way. It's a great plant. The next plant I'm going to talk about really quickly is meadow phlox, and that's Phlox maculata. This is another really lovely plant, and this one is absolutely identical to dame's rocket, except that dame's rocket has 4 petals in the flower, and the meadow phlox has 5 petals. So Unless you're looking at counting your petals, you're really going to get the same look. This is also a native. It grows in the same places. And actually, this is one of those plants that Dame's Rocket is most guilty of crowding out of its native range. So this is a great one to plant just to reestablish it throughout the East Coast. It's much more powdery resistant in general than garden phlox. You can plant the straight species type with no fear of that. There are some beautiful varieties out there that will attract hummingbirds and butterflies. One trick with this variety, sometimes some varieties of this plant are tasty to deer and some aren't. So make sure you check out the description before you purchase. But if you're looking for a variety selection on this, Rosalind is a gorgeous heirloom variety I highly recommend you looking at.
As we finish up this episode, Caroline has a few tips for your garden.
All right, so a couple tips on selecting and growing our favorite garden varieties of phlox. So for both of the types I mentioned today, you really, as I said earlier, you want to look up the varieties before you purchase, just to make sure that they have the resistances you're looking for, either powdery mildew resistance or deer resistance, because there is a lot of variation between varieties. The other fun thing, I know I mentioned that sometimes they can flop. One thing you can do to prevent that and actually get more blooms, so they will be a little bit smaller, is do a Chelsea chop in mid-May. This is a technique that's named after the Chelsea flower show that occurs in May.
Ooh.
And the timing, you have a couple weeks to do this, and don't sweat it too much. You can just cut the plants down by about a third to a half in May. That will make them sprout out from the cut part, and you will get more flowers, and the plants will stay shorter all season, so they're much less prone to flopping. The other way my grandfather used to do it, who ran a botanic garden, and I love this method, and you have to have a little time for this, but it's worth it, is you go through and you cut half the stems. Those shorter stems will support the taller stems, and then you get a much longer bloom season because the cut stems will bloom after the taller stems, and it gives you just an absolutely popping display.
That'll keep your garden going for even longer.
Yes.
Your variation tip can be used for things other than phlox too, right?
Oh yes, there's plenty of plants you can use the Chelsea chop on, and if you want to chat more about that or anything else garden related, feel free to call us at the office.
Thank you for joining us to learn about native alternatives to invasives in your garden. We hope you learned something new to make your garden even better.